All right. Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Tonight is Wednesday, September 25th, 2019. We are tracking two active systems across the Atlantic basin. We have Tropical Storm Karen north of Puerto Rico, a weak tropical system at this time, in a pretty hostile environment. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. And we also have Hurricane Lorenzo, the big fella out here, moving across the eastern Atlantic and will recurve over the next few days. Last night, or this afternoon rather, Tropical Storm Jerry was declassified to a post-tropical cyclone. We can see his kind of ghost moving over Bermuda right now, but the Hurricane Center said this afternoon that all tropical storm force winds have subsided with the storm. Tropical storm warnings have been discontinued, and the last advisory on Jerry was written at 5 p.m. So rip Jerry as it does kind of move off and just spin away and spin down across the northern Atlantic. So we'll start with Hurricane Lorenzo, and then we'll come back to Karen this evening. So going right to Lorenzo at 5 p.m. from the Hurricane Center shows Lorenzo between 90-mile-an-hour hurricane. It's moving west-northwest at 18 miles an hour. It's a pretty big, healthy storm this afternoon, guys. This one is definitely going to be a nice one before its life cycle ends. The convection has increased this afternoon. Not great. It doesn't show up great on water vapor, but there's definitely a healthy inner ring of convection forming there, and we're likely a couple hours away from seeing an eye appear. You can almost see one, but I don't know if that's actually the eye or not. But one is not far from coming out. You can see the excellent banding features this afternoon, indicating that that northerly wind shear that was impinging on the system is kind of ended, and we can see a nice cirrus canopy extending out to the north and back across the system. Pretty healthy hurricane overall. The only thing that Lorenzo is kind of dealing with, there is some dry air. You can kind of see it kind of in the mid levels here, and some of it is wrapping into the storm a little bit. So besides little intermittent spurts of dry air, the storm has to mix out. All systems are go for Lorenzo to continue to intensify. It was upgraded to a hurricane at 5 a.m. this morning, so it's our fifth hurricane of the 2019 season, which now officially checks off the last box of our predictions for the 2019 season as far as the expectations. The hurricane season's already met all the expectations we had for this year, so anything beyond that just goes further into that above average prediction that we had. The model agreement is still excellent that Lorenzo will turn out to sea. Virtually every single model tells us the same story, which is nice because this isn't always the case. But very high confidence Lorenzo will turn out to sea and not bother anybody, but will be an issue probably next week for parts of Western Europe as Lorenzo does kind of merge with the weather systems in the jet stream. Moving along, do we have Tropical Storm Karen this evening, a 40-mile-an-hour tropical storm, very ragged on the satellite presentation this afternoon. Karen is not having a great time. There's an upper level low to her west and a high to her east, and they are sort of tugging at Karen this afternoon and making her life pretty miserable. There's a little bit of thunderstorm activity. It's trying to persist right here in the middle. The center is probably somewhere right here, maybe. It was here earlier on visible satellite. It's not sure if that's exactly where the center is, but it is a weak center, and it's probably trying to elongate at this hour because she's having a very hard time closing off. Levi Cohen actually had a really good set of tweets on this. He's the guy that runs the Tropical Tidbits website. He's a grad student at Florida State, real smart guy, and he was talking about how essentially Karen is in what we call like a deformation zone, and the flow is essentially trying to stretch her in two different directions. So this would be Karen on the GFS model. This is one that shows relative humidity and dry. So you can see the brown being drier air, the green being more moist air. But you can see how the upper level low near the Bahamas is pulling air off to her west and off to the left, while the upper high to her east is kind of pulling it in this direction, and it's sort of pulling the cyclone apart. The cyclone wants to rotate in a counterclockwise motion, and yet it's kind of being pulled. This side is being pulled off this way, and this side is being pulled off this way. It's kind of opposite of what the cyclone wants to do. And it also kind of takes what convection and thunderstorms do fire and then pulls them away from the center. So those thunderstorms can't maintain around the center of the storm, and they can't deepen the cyclone and increase the size and the strength of the vortex that the cyclone is trying to wrap around. And he kind of shows the difference here with Lorenzo, how the high pressure guiding Lorenzo is more to its north and the flow is more in line with the storm. Think about it kind of like a tailwind for an aircraft versus a headwind, if you would, or something like that, or a wind hitting the plane on the side. So in a way, this is what's really kind of bothering Karen. And along with that, we simply just have an environment that's fairly dry. As we go over to the water vapor imagery, there's dry air nearby, The upper level low is training dry air towards her. And overall, this is just a very busy, hostile area for the storm to form in. We still see the steering flow is going to close off for her and block her from moving north. The high we talked about that's kind of pulling the air away from her is nosing in, while the high pressure over the eastern United States is kind of nosing in above this upper level low. And this is her avenue up of trying to get out of town. But as I advance the model a day or two, we can see that pretty much completely closes off, and we instead have this sort of wall of westerly winds that just block her from going any further north. The cyclone is going to get stuck right here in this light steering flow, and that's why the Hurricane Center's forecast has this looping motion where she just kind of sits right about here, and that's kind of her problem too. She's going to be sitting in the same area. It's going to be a very weak cyclone, and the environment isn't expected to improve a whole lot. So the Hurricane Center really kind of came down this afternoon. In their discussion, they talked about how they kind of expect this thing to struggle in its environment, and they're starting to put more stock into the models that really aren't developing the system much at all. And they have lowered their intensity forecast considerably from this morning, where it was still expected to be a 60 to 70 mile an hour tropical storm. By the weekend, it's now only expected to stay right about this strength, and maybe even weaker than that. And they even go as far as to say, if the global models are correct, it could even lose its convection and become post-tropical in about 3 days, which is possible. The global models give this thing no chance. Look at the ECNWF and GFS ensembles this afternoon. They have no confidence in Karen. All these blues and light blue lines you're seeing are indicating the storm being 20 to 30 knots. 34 knots is tropical storm status. So some of the darker blues could be tropical storm status, but look at the European model on the left here. Almost all of them, as she turns around here, are indicating a 20 to 30 knot cyclone, which would be below tropical storm status. And besides one or two outliers, it essentially sees that, and the GFS kind of tells us the same thing. Even something like the UK Met, which sometimes will maybe be a little more helpful or a little more on the upper side, is the same thing. So global models give this thing no chance. The intensity models, now about half of them do fall below that tropical storm threshold and keep them there, while some models, like noticeably the ship's forecast, does keep her above, into a healthy tropical storm status, and with the official Hurricane Center forecast riding just into tropical storm territory over the next several days. So Karen will be monitored and watched closely. But I think at this point in time, it's a little threat to the United States, and she has a lot of work cut out for her if she's going to try to survive this, make a loop, and then come back towards the eastern coast of the United States as some kind of healthy cyclone. That would be a pretty monumental task for the storm. And I'm not saying it couldn't happen. I'm just saying it's not very likely to happen. It could honestly dissipate for a day or two, and then the leftovers could ride up towards Florida, and then maybe when it's close, reform into something. I mean, there's solutions and possibilities like that, but I think the chances right now of a strong, organized tropical storm or hurricane turning and coming straight for the United States is pretty low tonight at this point. So we're gonna watch it carefully. It's gonna be a fun one to watch because of all the different things at play. But overall, Karen is not looking very healthy tonight and should not be a big threat. And that's about all I got for you. There's not much else going on across the Atlantic this evening. We're still watching our African waves, but it looks like we're going to be a day or two at least before we see any more of those get going off and coming off. And then that one spot we were watching in the Gulf of Mexico is no longer an area of interest by the Hurricane Center, and it's just a few areas of thunderstorms that's generally drifting off to the west. So that's what I got for you this evening, guys. It's going to stay busy for the next few weeks. The Hurricane Center and NOAA do believe that this activity uptick will stay up for at least another couple weeks, and we also have to watch Central America and the gyre circulations that start around October down there for something maybe coming up into the Gulf, where we typically watch this time of year. So always keep an eye on it uh, through October, and don't let your guard down just yet. So that's what I got for you this evening, guys. As always, thanks for watching, and have a good one.